Okay, so picture this. It's what, 2 a.m.?
The worst time.
Right, the absolute worst.
Yeah.
The house is completely silent still. You can, hear the low hum of the refrigerator.
Or that one car that drives by miles away.
Exactly. That just makes everything feel even quieter.
Yeah.
But inside your head,
Now that's a different story.
it's louder than rush hour traffic. You're replaying that ambiguous emoji from an email you sent yesterday.
Or dissecting a text from last week. Every single word.
Every word. And you're forecasting like 6 different versions of tomorrow's big meeting, and for some reason, every single one of them is a catastrophe.
If that scene sounds familiar and you've ever just laid there asking, why can't I just switch this off? Then, yeah, you know what overthinking is.
You've lived it.
You absolutely lived it, and you've nailed the problem perfectly there, because if you've been in that scene, you know this isn't some quirky personality trait.
Right. It's not something you just laugh about at parties.
No, it's a full-time, completely draining job that your brain just decides to take on without ever asking your permission. It's eating up all the resources that should be going to creativity or rest or just, joy.
And that is exactly why we decided to do this deep dive. The sources we looked at, especially drawing from The Secret to Ending Overthinking, give this just incredibly compelling diagnosis. And more importantly, a really detailed solution.
So our mission today is to pull out that practical brain-based map, the way out of that mental maze. We're not looking for, quick fixes or platitudes.
Just think positive stuff.
None of that. We're looking for simple neurological interventions. We have to understand the machine before we can even think about fixing it.
And defining the stakes here is so important because I think most of us underestimate the sheer scale of this. The source material points out that neuroscientists estimate the human mind produces up to 60,000 thoughts a day.
60,000.
That's just an almost incomprehensible number.
It is staggering. And here's the kicker, the part that's truly shocking and explains why it's so draining.
Okay.
The majority of those 60,000 thoughts are repetitive. And worse, they tend to skew negative.
So you're just rerunning the same bad movie over and over.
Exactly. You are literally rerunning yesterday's self-criticism on a loop. And that constant cycle, it doesn't just drain your time and energy, it erodes your executive function. It happens because we are dealing with this ancient threat-detecting brain circuitry that is just completely mismatched for the modern world.
Mismatched for our, digital ambiguous stressors.
Precisely. So our whole challenge is learning how to steer the brain when we can't physically outrun our own heads.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate then. If we're going to try and shut down all that noise, we have to know what we're targeting. What is the key difference between helpful, productive, problem-solving thought and that destructive overthinking, or what the book calls rumination?
That distinction is, it's absolutely vital because on the surface, they can look and feel very similar.
Right, they both feel like work.
They both feel like intense mental effort, exactly. But overthinking or rumination is really defined as the chronic habit of coming back to the same topic again and again without ever arriving at a new insight or an actionable decision. It's thought that has just stalled out.
So it's not about how hard you're thinking. It's about the fact that you're going in circles.
The circularity is everything. The author uses this powerful metaphor. It's like walking into a massive organized library, picking up a single book. Let's say it's the transcript of an argument from last week, and then just reading the same paragraph over and over for hours.
Without turning the page.
Without turning the page, without exploring any other shelves, your mind just stays locked in this one exhausting corner until the words completely blur and lose all meaning.
And that's so different from helpful thought.
Completely different. Helpful thought is always, by its very nature, forward-moving. It's curious, it's pragmatic, and this is crucial, it's time-bound. It asks a specific question like, okay, what's the best route to the airport with all this construction?
Right, a solvable problem.
Yeah. A solvable problem. It explores some options, it maps them out, and then here's the key. It stops when a satisfactory answer emerges. It might not be the perfect answer.
Oh, perfectionism is a huge part of this, I bet.
It's the enemy of progress here. Helpful thought looks for a good enough for now solution that lets you move on, lets you take action. The ruminator, on the other hand, is busy resurrecting scenes from a decade ago and scrutinizing these microscopic details that you absolutely cannot change. It just prefers those ellipses that trail off into more worry, never a final period.
That makes so much sense. And it explains why you feel so wiped out after a day of just thinking. You weren't moving forward at all. You were just running on a mental treadmill. Which I think brings us right to what the source calls the saber-toothed tiger problem.
Yeah.
Why is our brain sort of hardwired and even rewarded for constantly running these dangerous simulations?
Is the ultimate evolutionary mismatch. I mean, think back 100,000 years ago. The ancestral environment actively rewarded brains that ran these simulations. The early human who paused before dipping a cup in the river because a tiny ripple might have suggested a predator.
That person survived.
That person survived. That caution, that little embryonic form of overthinking, it saved lives. It ensured that cautious genes got passed on. The survival mechanism itself is brilliant, but it is calibrated for immediate physical threat.
And now we're using that same, high alert 5-alarm fire system for a toast email.
Yeah.
Or an awkward silence in a meeting.
Precisely. A flippant email from your manager or an unread text message, they can't physically harm you, but your ancient brainstem doesn't have a separate folder for social threat versus physical threat.
It's all just threat.
It's all just threat. So it hits the same big red panic button. This triggers the exact same surge of adrenaline and cortisol, the fight or flight response that would prepare you to run for your life. Your body is preparing for a sprint that never happens.
So you're just sitting there at your desk full of these chemicals?
Exactly. You're sitting at your desk or you're lying in bed, just poised, bracing for a battle that will never be fought. And that unused, lingering chemical activation is what fuels those ruminative spirals we feel so stuck in.
And all this sort of constant mental activity, it leads us right to something called the default mode network.
Yeah.
The DMN. It sounds like the brain's internal screensaver.
That's a great way to think about it.
But as you said, sometimes that screensaver is just a horror movie highlight reel. So tell us more about the DMN and why it seems to hijack our downtime.
Well, the DMN is a whole network of brain regions, like the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and it naturally activates when we're not focused on an external demanding task.
So when we're daydreaming.
Daydreaming, reflecting on yourself, consolidating memories, that's the DMN at work. It's actually a crucial tool for self-awareness and creativity. It's supposed to be useful.
But for overthinkers, it kind of goes rogue.
It becomes hyperactive. Researchers have found that in people who score high on measures of rumination, their DMN isn't some tranquil, reflective landscape. It becomes highly, highly biased toward negativity. So instead of gentle reflection, it just cues up a detailed highlight reel of past regrets, perceived failures, and all these looming catastrophes.
And that explains the dreaded 2 a.m. movie screen we talked about at the top.
Absolutely. The DMN is most active when you are at rest, especially when you're lying down to sleep. Your external workload is zero, the lights are off, your executive function is starting to wane.
So there's nothing else for it to do.
Nothing. It leaves all this space for the DMN to just unspool memories and hypothetical futures, all with that negative bias. The quiet hours become this festival of internal self-critique simply because the brain has no external data to process, so it turns inward and it starts looking for problems.
Okay, so given how miserable this whole loop is, it raises a really important question. Why does it feel so compulsive? If it's draining us, making us miserable, why does the brain keep pulling that lever? Let's get into the neurochemical fuels that make this habit so sticky.
The chemistry is maybe the most fascinating part of this, and it directly explains that addictive quality of worry. When your amygdala senses a threat, it doesn't matter if it's a tiger or a terse text, it triggers the HPA axis.
Right, the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal glands.
That's the body's main stress communication system. And when that threat signal goes out, the hypothalamus releases CRH, which tells the pituitary to release ACTH, which then tells the adrenals to flood your body with cortisol and adrenaline.
And that whole system is supposed to turn off when the threat is gone.
Exactly. But here's the problem. When the threat is a thought that you just keep re-ruminating on, the threat never actually leaves. So this chronic elevation of cortisol literally hijacks your prefrontal cortex.
Which is the part we need to think clearly.
It's your executive center. It's for planning, decision-making, emotional regulation. The limbic system, the seat of raw emotion, gets louder and louder, and it degrades your ability to plan, locking you into the emotion of panic or anger.
So the stress hormones are actively disabling the part of the brain we need to solve the problem. That's a really cruel feedback loop.
It is, but then you have dopamine playing this sort of perverse role.
Dopamine, I thought that was the pleasure chemical.
It's the neurotransmitter of anticipation and seeking. So every time you revisit a worry, say, replaying an argument in your head, you get a tiny little squirt of dopamine.
Why?
This squirt isn't a reward for solving the problem. It's a reward for the anticipation of potentially figuring it out this time.
So the brain is basically gambling on a solution. It's like pulling a slot machine handle.
That is the perfect analogy. The source calls this a self-reinforcing chemical addiction. You're chasing that neurochemical squirt, not because you enjoy the anxiety, but because your brain is desperately trying to achieve balance in this highly counterproductive way. The cycle becomes compulsive because the brain is chemically motivated to keep spinning the wheel.
And what about serotonin? I know that's linked to mood.
Yes, and serotonin levels tend to drop during these prolonged states of stress and rumination. When serotonin is low, the brain desperately starts hunting for certainty.
The perfect plan, the perfect answer.
The perfect piece of knowledge, the perfect outcome that will restore that emotional balance. But of course, that quest for certainty just triggers more of those dopamine surges as you anticipate a resolution. And that just deepens the groove of the overthinking habit. The neurochemistry itself ensures the loop is both compulsive and completely self-defeating.
Okay, so if we understand the engine, we now need to find the spark plugs. We need to connect this to the bigger picture and find the specific sparks that are igniting this chemical fire. What exactly is a trigger in the context of overthinking, and why is mapping that landscape so vital to stopping the loop?
A trigger is any stimulus, internal or external, that reliably sets off your cycle of repetitive, unproductive thought. And mapping them is vital because so often we try to address the symptom, the spiraling thought itself, instead of the root cause.
We're fighting the smoke instead of the fire.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that a lot of these triggers are invisible. They hide behind ordinary habits. People might assume their trigger is some major event like a big presentation, but often the actual trigger is the anxiety or the self-critical judgment that surfaces hours before the event even starts.
So triggers can kind of disguise themselves.
Absolutely. They can hide as totally benign actions like checking your bank app, or scrolling a specific social media feed, or even just glancing at a certain section of the news. Until you map them, you don't realize that those 30 seconds of checking the app reliably set off 40 minutes of catastrophic financial worry.
The source material breaks these down into 4 core categories, which I think gives us a great framework to start observing this in ourselves. Let's walk through those.
Okay, so first we have external situations. These come from your surroundings. They're usually the easiest to recognize. Deadlines, traffic jams, specific people, or even just certain environments like walking into a particular meeting room. If you notice your worry always kicks in the moment you turn on your work laptop, well, the laptop itself is part of that triggering environment.
Okay, that's straightforward. Next up is internal emotions.
These are the emotional states that act as a cue for the loop. Emotions like guilt or envy or loneliness. For example, a momentary honest pang of sadness might suddenly mutate into this catastrophic stream of questions about why you aren't succeeding or if you'll ever find connection. The trigger isn't the initial sadness, it's how your mind immediately labels and then elaborates on that emotional signal.
And then the body. The book talks about bodily sensations playing this huge, often overlooked role.
This is one of the biggest surprises for people. Your body whispers before your mind shouts. These little minor discomforts, a chest flutter from too much coffee, a pinch in your neck from bad posture, even a stomach rumble, can trick your vigilant brain into launching a full investigative committee.
Why is my heart racing? Am I sick? What's happening?
Exactly. Your body's minor feedback becomes a megaphone for catastrophic thinking, especially if you're prone to health anxiety or just general anxiety.
And then finally, there are cognitive themes.
Right, these are the purely mental habits, the long-standing filters you view the world through. They include things like perfectionism, an overwhelming need for certainty, people-pleasing tendencies, or a deep-seated fear of rejection. So if your internal filter insists, I must not disappoint anyone, ever, then even a mildly neutral look from a coworker becomes a powerful trigger.
And you're off to the races, dissecting that interaction for hours.
Until you're convinced the entire relationship is just hanging by a thread.
So to actually map these, the source offers a really simple but powerful practice. Notice, name, and nurture. How does that work in the real world?
This is basically your flashlight for navigating that inner landscape. It turns all that confusion into useful data. So when you feel the mental pace quicken, first you just notice the onset. You feel the tightening in your stomach. You hear the return of a particular phrase in your head.
You just become aware.
You just become aware. Second, you name what's happening, but with factual, non-judgmental language. You avoid, oh, I'm panicking again, I'm so ridiculous. Instead, you just state the facts. My chest feels tight, and I'm having a thinking loop about the budget meeting.
Naming it like that kind of separates you from the event.
It does. And then finally, you nurture. You just offer a moment of self-kindness, maybe a slow, intentional exhale, or placing a hand on your heart or stomach, just to ground yourself before you decide on an intervention. You're acknowledging the discomfort without judging the person who's experiencing it.
The case study of Maria, the marketing manager, really brings this home. Her big spiral wasn't about the looming deadline itself.
That's right. Maria realized through doing this observation practice that her Monday spiral always began exactly 5 minutes after the team's weekly stand-up call ended.
That's specific.
That's specific. The trigger wasn't the deadlines they discussed on the call, but a single self-critical judgment that popped into her head right after. I came across as unprepared. That one thought, that one self-accusation, that was the spark that ignited hours of disastrous mental rehearsal every single week.
So what did she do?
By observing and naming that judgment, she decided to disrupt the pattern. She started immediately taking a conscious 5-minute walk right after the call, just changed her environment, and by doing that, she shrank her typical Monday spiral from 6 hours to less than 30 minutes. She had successfully altered her mental geography.
Wow. Okay, now here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. This is where we connect all this mental racing to the physical cost. If you feel physically exhausted after a day of doing nothing but sitting at your desk, your body is absolutely keeping score. What is the physical toll of this constant mental activity?
The physical toll is immense. It's immense because that system, the HPA axis we talked about, it doesn't differentiate between a real threat and an imagined one.
Right.
So when the mind senses a threat, the amygdala triggers that axis, flooding the system with cortisol and adrenaline. In a genuine emergency, you'd metabolize those chemicals through physical activity. You'd run, you'd fight. But when the threat is only mental, like replaying an embarrassing comment, those chemicals just linger and they create collateral damage.
So it's the difference between a healthy, necessary spike of adrenaline and this constant toxic drip.
Exactly. Chronic overthinking ensures your body is maintained in a state of low-level alarm. And this constant drip of cortisol is highly destructive. It contributes to elevated blood pressure, insulin resistance, it suppresses non-essential processes like digestion and your immune response, and creates systemic inflammation.
And the adrenaline.
That constant adrenaline surge causes that low-grade tremor or that phantom buzzing sensation that so many overthinkers describe. That feeling of a phone vibrating under your pillow when it's not even there, that's what disrupts the ability to fall into deep, restorative sleep.
And what about the cardiovascular system? You mentioned blood pressure. It's basically being told to sprint in place all day long.
That's a perfect way to put it. The heart is working overtime. Sustained high heart rate and blood pressure mean the inner lining of your arteries becomes less pliable, and that increases the risk for cardiovascular issues down the road. There's powerful data showing that repeated rumination about work problems predicted a significantly higher incidence of heart disease 5 years later.
Wow. Even independent of things like smoking or diet.
Even independent of those factors, the mental mileage absolutely shows up on the cardiology charts.
Okay, let's talk about the impact on our muscles and our gut.
Well, the literal meaning of shouldering responsibility becomes painfully clear. Your upper back, neck, and shoulder muscles, they contract when you rehearse difficult conversations or brace for unknown outcomes. This leads directly to chronic tension headaches, neck pain, and TMJ dysfunction.
Teeth grinding.
Teeth grinding, exactly. And in the gut, those same stress hormones divert blood and oxygen away to the limbs for that fight or flight that never comes. This slows digestion, it alters the delicate balance of the gut microbiome, and it leads to issues like IBS.
And that becomes another thing to worry about.
It's a vicious negative feedback loop. The gut discomfort becomes a new physical symptom for the brain to latch onto and worry about, and the whole cycle just restarts itself.
And all of this together is what the source calls the cumulative burden.
That is the allostatic load. It's the physiological wear and tear. It's the cost of your body constantly trying to achieve stability allostasis through these endless, costly adjustments. High allostatic load shows up as a high resting heart rate, chronic fatigue, impaired memory and focus, and an inability to adapt to new stress.
So what are the early signs, the whispers before the shouts?
The body whispers before it shouts. You might notice a permanently clenched jaw, an inability to take a truly deep, satisfying breath, or sudden, intense cravings for salty snacks.
Salty snacks, really?
Yes, that's actually a signal that cortisol has depleted your sodium stores as part of that ongoing stress response. Recognizing these physical whispers is one of the most actionable forms of self-awareness you can practice.
We know why the brain loops. It's this false promise of safety, control, and that little chemical reward. That compulsion is strong. So how do we actually break this treadmill effect where we're expending all this energy but gaining zero psychological ground?
The first and most powerful intervention is to realize that rumination is a cognitive counterfeit. It disguises itself as productive thought.
It feels like you're doing something useful.
Right. And that compulsion is fueled by the body's desperate need to act on all that stored stress energy. The solution is something called metacognition, the skill of thinking about thinking. It's realizing you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts.
So we need to create some distance. That's where the pause principle comes in.
Exactly. The pause principle is so simple but so profound. Once you notice the loop starting, you must create space between you and your thought. The moment that narrative starts spinning, you just inhale slowly, hold for a count of 2, and then exhale even more slowly.
And during the exhale,
Crucially, during that exhale, you must actively, imaginatively, place the entire thought loop, the whole scene, the whole worry on a shelf across the room. You're not trying to solve it right now. You are simply shelving it. This deliberate physical stillness and imaginative distancing sends a powerful message to your nervous system. I am in control here. This is not an emergency.
okay, so once you've established that pause, the source says you have to choose a fork in the road.
Yeah.
Action or acceptance. You have to commit to one or the other.
This is the moment you take back your agency. You have to ask yourself a very direct question. Is there an action I can take right now that moves me forward? If the answer is yes, you must take a micro-action immediately.
What's a microaction?
It could be sending one specific email, making one phone call, or simply writing down the single necessary first step. Taking that tiny action creates forward momentum, and that disrupts the loop. The case study of Maya, who was replaying a meeting misstep, is perfect here. She just sent a quick, competent email acknowledging the slip.
And that closed the loop.
It closed the mental file. She took the necessary action to demonstrate competence, and she could move on.
But what if the answer is no? What if the problem is from the past, or it's purely hypothetical, or it's 2 a.m. and there's nothing you can do?
Then you must choose acceptance. You practice letting go. You accept that mental replay cannot rewrite the past or perfectly predict the future. You choose a letting go practice. Maybe silently repeating a mantra like, that chapter is complete, or visualizing that memory floating away down a stream. You are actively training your brain that not everything painful can be solved intellectually, and that sometimes letting go is the most productive choice you can make.
And this brings us back to why the classic advice, just don't think about it, always fails.
It's guaranteed to reinforce the problem. Trying to suppress a thought only makes it more salient. You end up focusing all your attention on the very thing you want to avoid. The solution is always replacement, because the brain abhors a vacuum. Once you create that pause, you have to replace the old habit loop with a new constructive activity, which transitions us perfectly to the systematic replacement strategy, the 5-minute mind reset.
This is the good stuff. This is the sticky note you can fit in your back pocket. The rapid intervention sequence built on breath, focus, and grounding. Why is 5 minutes the magic number here?
5 minutes seems to hit this neurological sweet spot. It's long enough to fully slow down your cognitive momentum, reset the nervous system, and deactivate that overactive DMN. But it's short enough that it doesn't feel like an overwhelming chore, which means you'll actually do it consistently. And the 4+1 sequence is systematic and deeply effective.
Okay, let's walk through the minute-by-minute guide. Minute 1, exhale the static.
The first 60 seconds are all about the exhale. The exhale is the brake pedal for your nervous system. You inhale gently for 4 counts through your nose, and then you exhale actively through your mouth for 6 counts, making the opening small, like you're blowing through a narrow straw.
And that long exhale is key.
It's everything. That extended exhale deliberately activates your parasympathetic system. It pushes all that stored static and adrenaline out of your chest, and you have to repeat it smoothly for the full minute to really feel the difference. Don't rush it.
Okay, minute 2, anchor attention. The storm is settled a bit. Now we lock down the focus.
Correct. Your goal isn't an empty mind. That's impossible. It's a focused mind. You choose a single, boring anchor that exists right here, right now. The hum of the AC, the sound of a clock ticking, or just the physical rise and fall of your abdomen as you breathe.
And what happens when your mind wanders? Because it will.
It will. And the critical skill here is noticing that your thoughts have drifted in and then gently, without scolding yourself, just redirecting your attention back to that chosen anchor. Every time you do that, you're strengthening your focus muscle.
Minute 3, body scan and release. This is about reconnecting the mind to that physical tension.
Yes, we have to address the chronic tension created by that allostatic load.
Yeah.
You scan slowly from the crown of your head to your toes, and you intentionally imagine warmth melting any tension you find. Focus on the little micro-clenches we often miss: the eyes, the jaw, the throat, the shoulders. That client who had budget tongue,
Budget time.
a perpetually clenched tongue whenever he worried about money, he used this minute to consciously relax his tongue, pairing it with the mantra, tongue soft, thought soft. Releasing that physical tension sends an immediate safety signal to the brain.
I love that. Okay, minute 4. Sense expansion. This pulls us out of our head and into the real world.
This is the ultimate grounding tool. You widen the aperture of your awareness. You have to engage sensory detail to root yourself in the present moment, because rumination cannot exist in the present moment. So you use your peripheral vision, you identify the nearest sound, then the farthest sound. You notice the texture of your clothing against your skin. You feel the precise weight and position of your feet on the floor. This flood of sensory data overrides the abstract, looping stories of the DMN.
And finally, minute 5. Choosing your next thought.
The stage is now clear, and remember, the brain hates a vacuum. This final minute is about exercising intentional agency. You choose what thought steps onto the stage next. You intentionally select a concluding constructive thought or phrase like, I can handle what's next, or this is good enough, or even just a positive image like picturing a loved one's face. This demonstrates to your mind that it serves your conscious command, and it ends the reset on a note of confidence, not anxiety.
That sequence really works because it systematically attacks the stress response from so many different angles.
Yeah.
We saw how crucial breath is in that first minute. Let's expand on the science of breathing. How does it literally hack our nervous system?
This is just foundational neurobiology. Anxious, shallow chest breathing causes us to blow off too much CO2. And that imbalance signals the brain to go on higher alert, which initiates more anxiety. Slow, conscious breathing, especially with those extended exhales, balances your CO2 levels and restores equilibrium. And critically, deep diaphragmatic breathing directly taps the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve, that long communicator between the brain and the gut.
Exactly. It's the main highway for shifting your nervous system's balance. When you stimulate the vagus nerve through slow, deep breathing, you shift the dominance from the sympathetic nervous system, the worry or fight or flight side, to the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest side. Conscious breath is literally the remote control for your nervous system's tone.
So we need techniques for specific needs, more than just that one slow exhale. What are some reliable variations for different situations?
First, you have to master the foundation, which is diaphragmatic or quiet belly breathing. Instead of shrugging your shoulders and sucking air into your upper chest, you focus on sinking the air down, inflating your belly and lower ribs like a balloon. This gets air into the richest part of the lungs for efficient gas exchange, and it's the most powerful vagus nerve stimulant there is.
And for deep calm, there's the rhythmic breath.
The rhythmic breath gives you a reliable structure for deep relaxation. The 4-4-6-2 pattern is highly effective. You inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6, and then pause for 2. That extended exhale plus the pause powerfully reinforces parasympathetic dominance. It sends strong safety signals to the brain that you're secure enough to rest. It's excellent for winding down before bed.
What about for focused, alert calm? If you need to be sharp but not, wired.
That's where the box breath is perfect. It uses equal sides. 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. This restores equilibrium and gives you an alert calm. It's often used by emergency responders and military personnel because it optimizes focus without making you sleepy. It's excellent for those minutes before a big presentation or a difficult conversation.
And finally, the fastest way to drop anxiety in public, which, let's be honest, is often where the mind starts to spiral.
That is the physiological sigh. It's a natural reflex we all have, but we use unconsciously. It's a rapid double inhale through the nose like 2 quick sips of air, followed by a long audible sigh out through the mouth.
What is the double inhale for?
The double inhale physically pops open collapsed little air sacs, the alveoli, in your lungs, and the long sigh that follows efficiently flushes out excess CO2. It is the fastest known technique to reset the nervous system and drop anxiety levels. And you can do it discreetly in a bathroom stall or even in the middle of a meeting if you need to.